Good morning and welcome to the Sunday service. This morning we're going to practice the metta meditation. After the meditation, Chandana Bhikkhu is going to give a Dhamma talk. Right now, you can practice metta meditation. Venerable Panyaloka is going to lead the meditation.
Sit in comfortable positions. Take a deep breath. Now we are going to practice the loving kindness meditation. If you're only comfortable, close your eyes and reflect on these loving kindness thoughts. May my mind be filled with the thoughts of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. May I be free from enmity. May I be free from ill will. May I be generous. May I be gentle. May I be relaxed. May I be happy and peaceful. May I be healthy. May my heart become soft. May my words be pleasing to others. May my actions be kind. No matter where I go in the world, in any directions, may I greet people with happiness, peace, and friendliness. May I be protected in all directions from greed, anger, aversion, hatred, and jealousy. May my parents, teachers, Dharma teachers, brothers and sisters, friends, well-wishers, and enemies also be free from enmity, ill will, and grudge. May they all be happy, healthy, and peaceful. May each and every one of us be free from greed, anger, aversion, jealousy, and fear. May the thought of loving kindness embrace us and envelop us. May every cell, every drop of blood, every atom, every molecule of our entire bodies and minds be charged with the thoughts of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. Let us relax our minds. Let us relax our bodies. Let peace and tranquility of loving kindness pervade our entire being. May all those who have hurt us, who are in hospitals, suffering from numerous sicknesses and COVID, meet with peace and happiness. May they be free from pain, affliction, depression, disappointment, anxiety, and fear. May all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. Practice the silent meditation for a couple of minutes. And when you hear this bell, open your eyes.
Thank you, Venerable Panyaloka. Now it's time for the Dhamma talk. Today our speaker, Chandana Bhikkhu. We know Chandana a long time, almost, I believe, around 25 years. Chandana, are you there?
Yes, Bhante.
All right, Chandana, you can start your Dhamma talk. We have time almost, we have time until the 12, but you better stop like 10 minutes before the 12, then people can ask question and you can answer also. Thank you, Chandana. You can start.
Very well. Good morning, everyone, and good evening to listeners who are in different parts of the world. I recognize some names who are from different time zones. When I was asked to give the talk today, I was thinking, what theme should I address or approach in discussing? I said, well, why not go after the big prize? Finding the way out of suffering. So finding the way out of suffering and not being stuck in samsara is why we have the Dhamma of Lord Buddha, as taught in the early suttas. So if you narrow it down, that's what we come to. How to get out of suffering. If we have been living during the past year at least on this planet with even the most minuscule amount of awareness, we see how everyone is suffering. 2 days ago, I heard of someone that I have known since childhood who recently passed away because of COVID. And there are countless other people around the world who have, which brings the attention back to the frailty of this human existence, this life. Something that the Buddha dedicated 45 years of his life to help clarify, identify, and give solutions for, so that people could make the most of the teachings and remove themselves from this constant cycle of experiencing more and more suffering. Earlier today, I was giving a talk on the life after death theme, with the Buddhist Mahavihara and in Malaysia. And it was also touching on this subject, because whichever way you touch the Dhamma, whichever way you approach it, it has to have the same flavor. The Buddha taught two things: the presence of suffering in whatever life form you take rebirth in. Even if you're a deva, there is some level of suffering. Even if there is no painful experience on a physical level, let's say, still there is the suffering of impermanence, because impermanence comes with suffering. Because even the joys and the bliss that one experiences in this life or any other life, it is temporary, and the person will know for sure for oneself that it does not last. If we've ever experienced something beautiful in life, we know this to be the case. When you hold someone, when you hug someone, when you look at someone you really love and care for and you haven't met in a while, and you see them, as you're turning your back and you're walking away, if this person really means something to you, moves you deeply, there's a certain sadness because you know that that moment will never be repeated ever again. Now, especially if you live with such a person, you're fortunate enough to have such beings in your life, there is this constant presence, this ghost-like presence of fear of, I will lose you. That is suffering. It's important for us to not look at the teachings of the Buddha as some theoretical premises or some abstractions, some concepts. So, how do we get out? How can we find a way out of suffering? Well, we go back to the very simple teaching, the first, let's say, not necessarily simple, but it is simplified. It's clear in the way it's laid out by the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. Is there suffering? Oh, yes. But am I aware of it? That's the big question. Most of us are not. We're trying to push ourselves out of this space where the suffering is taking place. So we're not present for the suffering. And I'm not advocating, nor did the Buddha advocate, of course, for us to sit through the suffering and just bear it and just deal with that. No, we need to understand, and that's what makes it the truth, the noble truth of suffering. So there needs to be awareness to identify suffering first, and then looking for the causes for it. That curiosity needs to be there. And the cause of it is the very attachment to the thing that is opposite to the suffering itself, meaning the joy that I am now missing because I am dealing with this distress. I want the calm, I want the tranquility, not this stress, not this pain. And then the Buddha talked about the other thing. I mentioned the Buddha taught two things, right? So the first is the suffering part. The second part is the cessation of suffering, nirodha. Nirodha, or nibbana, in fact. And that is when the person sees how they're latching on to this thing that it is other than what is taking place. The truth of the moment, basically, I'm denying it. That's why I'm holding on to something for dear life. That's the thing that, and as tight as I'm holding on, it's basically, it depends on that, the intensity of the suffering. How tightly am I holding on to this? And the moment I realize that it's because of me latching on to this and I start to relinquish, that is what cessation is. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no suffering. Of course, we are inhabiting this body in this form, this time around. And it is made up of these different causes. The Buddha simplified it into the four great elements: earth, water, fire, and air. But what he was trying to talk about is the different causes, conditions that bring this together. And what comes together is conditioned, meaning it will come apart from being together. Even friendships, there was a moment where they came together, and the day will come where they will dissolve, and the conditions are no longer there. So long as the body is made of conditions, it will suffer the pain. However, the mind needs to be able to see that this pain isn't my pain necessarily. It is my identification with this body and the painful experiences that I'm going through. That's the true dukkha. In essence, we're talking about the ignorance of this process. And how can there come to be the cessation of dukkha? That's when the Buddha presented the Magga, or the Attangika Magga, the Noble Eightfold Path. Starting with right view. And if we don't have the right view, the very first step, right view, the GPS is set wrong, and there cannot be anything other than suffering throughout life in the person. So the Four Noble Truths as a way out of suffering, these are not just principles or things to be memorized by rote, or things that we can, as teachers, for example, we can give speeches on or Dhamma talks on. And after that, everything is done. I go off my thing and do my thing, and then life greets me and taps me on the shoulder. Well, can I bring the Dhamma into those instances in my life when it's really hot with situations that are perhaps undesirable, unpleasant, painful? Those are the moments when we can apply the Four Noble Truths so we can decode, decipher, and understand, the intensity of suffering depends on my constant drive to want to change the suffering versus let me understand. Oftentimes we forget that this path that the Buddha taught is all about wisdom, gaining wisdom. And that is the crucial part that will set us free from this bondage to samsara. So it's not rocket science, folks. One does not need to have memorized the suttas or even listened to or read all of the suttas. Even a little bit of the teachings can be enough, the Buddha says in the Dhammapada. Just a little bit. But enough so that you can understand and you can apply in your life. Aware about the ignorance drops in intensity. And the experience that the Buddha and his arahants have talked about and continue to talk about suddenly becomes manifest. And the suttas come alive. When Venerable Mahakassapa, one of his senior disciples, asked Lord Buddha this very interesting question. He asked, Bhante, why in the olden days and previously, why were there more arahants and less rules for Vinaya or precepts that monks have to follow? And the Buddha's response is quite beautiful. He explains how it is not some cataclysmic event that takes place in the world that destroys the Dhamma, meaning the teachings. It is not the dissolution of the four great elements that I mentioned earlier. But he states clearly that it is the set of five detrimental factors or attitudes that human beings can live by, that bring about the destruction, the disappearance, the contamination of the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings. And what are these five? The Buddha explains them. First, he says, a lack of respect and regard for the Buddha. Now, of course, the Buddha lived and died. The human being died. The Buddha died. But we're not talking necessarily about the physical Buddha. We're talking about, the way I understand it, the lack of reverence or lack of faith, lack of respect toward the Buddha, meaning the ability for oneself to attain to experience that which was experienced by the Buddha himself. So am I good enough for Nibbana? Is one way to ask and to ameliorate this situation, to turn this detrimental attribute into something positive. The second one is lack of respect and reverence and regard for the Dhamma, the teachings. And this is another reason why I insist to my students to go ahead and read or listen to the suttas, because it's still there. The Dhamma, the message is still there, and not be taken by all this nonsensical things that happen all around us. People's words, people's things. Go back to the suttas. Over the course of centuries in Asia, people have been worshiping commentators who, by the way, to my knowledge and research, 99.9% of them were not practitioners. They were just scholars. And we have them still today who cannot even practice 1 hour of meditation. They can't even experience jhanas, for example. Many of them are bhikkhus. So, lack of respect and regard for the Dhamma is another factor that will bring about the destruction, the disappearance, contamination of the Dhamma. The third one, obviously, as you might have guessed, is the lack of regard and respect or veneration towards the Sangha. One way of looking at this would be lacking the willingness to become a Kalyana Mitta. Kalyana Mitta is a loving spiritual friend, a good friend, someone who is the embodiment of the teachings, someone who inspires. So one becomes an inspiration for oneself, and by extension opens that world up to the world around them and becomes a Kalyana Mitta, a spiritual, good, true friend to others. This would be another way of looking at what the Buddha meant by Sangha. So this ameliorates, this fixes that detrimental factor into something positive as well. And the fourth factor is lack of respect and regard for the training that needs to be done. And the training, it comes in threefold. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Sila is the virtue which we are lacking in this world today. Yesterday, during the morning Zoom meditation, I mentioned about the Hiri and Ottappa. Wise, virtuous shame, wise. It's not the toxic shame. Wise, virtuous shame, meaning how the person looks at oneself, uses that reflective mirror to look at oneself. Okay, what am I doing? Is the choice I'm making to act this way, is it kusala or akusala, for example? So the person is always scrutinizing, looking at oneself with careful and cautious, observant eyes, with wise reflection. Think of it like that. And the Ottappa part is the wise, virtuous dread or fear or consideration, meaning what I'm about to do, would I still do it if there were other people around me? Or, even more poignant, would I still do it if the Buddha was there? He were sitting right there. Would I still go ahead, think like this because he could see my thoughts? Would I still think these thoughts? So immediately the person, if it's a akusala or unwholesome thought or word, speech or action by the body, if it is akusala or unwholesome, the person immediately becomes repulsed by that and pushes oneself. This is the manifestation of living a life that is virtuous, meaning there is sila. And when there is sila, we suddenly open the door for samadhi. That's why I'm very critical of people who teach mindfulness without the sila part. You cannot develop, you cannot teach mindfulness without sila. It's impossible to go far. Yes, you might develop some concentrative skills for a while, but it will dissipate. So that's the reason why the Buddha used sila as the foundation, because once your sila is intact, you won't have remorse coming up while you're sitting. You won't have regrets coming up while you're meditating. And when the meditation, therefore, is calm, tranquil, beautiful, collected, stability of mind is there, suddenly insights take place. And that's what the Buddha talked about, the third of the threefold trainings, which is panya, which is wisdom, discernment. And the fifth attitude that brings about the destruction of the Dhamma is the lack of respect and regard for the meditative practice, meaning putting the effort to develop that samadhi, the collectedness of mind. I have recently been asked quite often about the role of mantras, for example, and whether they have a place. Well, if I'm coming from the teachings, the original teachings of the Buddha, they do not have a place. They do not have a leg to stand on. There is no liberation through mantras. The Buddha even discouraged pujas, for example. Even when people were asking him, how can we come up with a ritual, for example? He discouraged those things. Why? Because pujas, mantras, this and that, when you compare them to the work that is necessary to develop the samadhi aspect of the practice of the patipada, the training, they pale in comparison. Because the fruits of this practice come out, not through some mantras that can have some benefits in the physical sense, to calm, to hypnotize oneself. But they don't go far. They cannot bring wisdom and insight. It's the practice of meditation in the form of collectedness of mind, samadhi, a term that the Buddha came up with, to bring about wisdom. And remember what I mentioned about this path is all about bringing wisdom? Well, that's what we're talking about here. Because only that developed mind that is able to see with clear understanding, with the eye of Dhamma, and all of a sudden the shackles of ignorance fall on their own. Because the person will no longer do what they were doing yesterday. They have passed the point of no return through effort. So, as an encouragement, the Buddha also adds in this Samyutta Nikaya section, sutta, where that I'm referring to, where Venerable Mahakassapa is asking these questions, and the Buddha is responding to him. He talks also about even he says, if the bhikkhunis and the bhikkhus are having these detrimental attitudes in themselves, and even if the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis are not practicing, the Dhamma can still be saved, he says, if it is kept alive in the hearts and minds and lives of the laity who are practicing the Dhamma. So the Dhamma will continue to survive if there are people who practice it. So it is not rocket science. It's simple but not easy, as one of my teachers in the past used to say. So I would like to stop here before going further and see if there are any questions and comments that I may be able to try to help answer. Any thoughts?
Yes, Chandana. The one question, Nick, you can ask your question.
Thank you, Bhante, for your talk. I'm very grateful for today's Sunday service. My question is about right view. How do I develop right view? Or how do I practice right view? It doesn't seem like it's a singular place to get to, so I'm sure this is a daily work. So how do I practice right view? Mm-hmm. And if that's not a question you want to answer, then maybe you can help me understand what things are unconditional. I'm struggling to to understand if all things are conditional, including dharmas, or if only dhamma is unconditional? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'll first address, thank you for your question first. I'll address the first question and then the second one. The right view part, I'm also a practicing psychotherapist, and I will use that to address your question, because it's something that comes up a lot when a person is experiencing certain symptoms, for example, depression or anxiety or anger, etc., etc. It becomes very heady for the person. They personify the symptoms and they say, I am such and such, I am this, I am that, instead of this is what's happening based on the conditions. Now, why did I bring this example? The person is in fact disassociated from their bodies. So they have cut themselves off from experiencing the body where the show is taking place, in other words. There's an immediate manifestation of, on some somatic level, on the physical level of that symptom. Usually it manifests in the form of tightness in the brain, and then it shows up in different parts of the body. Muscles tighten up, fists are formed when there was an open palm, suddenly, when you mention certain things. So what I'm referring to is the identification, first recognition, and seeing what is taking place, and identifying it as akusala, as unwholesome. Now, when we are doing this, suddenly we see what is causing us pain versus what is not, or what is causing us pleasure, something that is not painful. This is at the crux of developing right view. Now, what we have is a population of the planet who keep banging our head against the wall and expecting there to be a doorway. And we complain as to why we're having a headache. Because that's the epitome of having wrong view. The Buddha gave the beautiful example of a person who goes ahead and grinds sand grains together in order for him to produce oil, sesame oil. And in his question to this person who came to him with this query, the Buddha asks him, well, do you think this gentleman is going to end up with sesame oil by him grinding these grains of sand together? And the man shakes his head and says, how can they, Bhante? They could spend eternity doing that and no oil, not even a single droplet is going to come out of there. Why? Because the ingredient is wrong. Now, he says, had they used sesame seeds, now we're talking. Then you grind it together, you get sesame oil. So many of us are living lifestyles that produce more suffering. Yet, we're complaining that we're experiencing suffering. So the presence of right view will immediately identify. There was a woman who came to one of my previous teachers complaining of nightmares. Every night she has nightmares. So the teacher, who was a monk, asked her, well, what kind of food do you eat? What time do you go to bed? What type of things you're, involved in? Are you taking any meds and things like that? And she says, no. And she says, well, I just watch some movies before I go to bed. And he asks her, what kind of movies? Oh, she says, I love horror movies, suspenseful movies. Well, he says, there you go. Don't watch the movies. And she says, well, no, Bhante, I love those movies. And he says, well, don't come complaining to me about having nightmares then. So I don't know what happened to her. Hopefully she stopped watching them, or at least stopped complaining about having nightmares. But there is the introduction of right view. And oftentimes, we're going to have to go against the grain a little bit if we have lived lives that are based on wrong view. So that is how I would approach addressing the first question. And as far as the conditionality of things, the mind is a conditional phenomenon in a sense. It loves to work with conditions, meaning imagery, perceptions, thoughts, concepts. So even when we're talking about the unconditioned, meaning nibbana, for example, it's going to use conditioned situations, concepts, and things for it to relate to, because it does not know how to process that. And that is one of the reasons why the Buddha used negative language to address, for example, nibbana. Nibbana is not this, nibbana isn't that, etc., etc. So my invitation to you would be something like an encouragement to go ahead and deepen your practice, perhaps, and to develop the right view and a different approach if your previous approach was not working for you. And really going back to the suttas, for me, was a blessing. And I resisted my teachers, 25, 30 years ago. I like to just be like a bee, going here, flying over here, and get some nectar from there, this and that. And he's like, no, Chandana, you got to go back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha. And I went, and I saw how natural it was, how organic, how human it was. The conversations, the situations, the complaints. So I hope this helps. Next question, Bhante, or should I read the questions? Oh, thank you for talking. Next question. Sila. Not Fila, it's Sila. S as in Simon, I-L-A. And the I is a long E. It has this diacritical mark on it. Sila is it's defined in English in different ways. The most usual one is discipline, is virtue, is morality, something in the West we come to despise. But the word is not the problem. It's how it was shoved down our throats. And if you're coming from a Judeo-Christian Islamic culture, you know what I'm talking about. But it's not the word that's the problem. It's how it was presented. And to this day, every once in a while, I have students who come up and they say, Bhante, can we kind of shove Sila aside? Is it really that necessary? Well, I say, if you want to deepen your practice and go and experience, for example, even the first jhana, then we need to practice Sila. Well, what are the Sila? There are 5 for a layperson. These are the basic ones. They're called the Pancha Sila, or the 5 virtuous principles. By the way, they are not. They cannot be compared to the 10 commandments, for example, if you're coming from those traditions. And no one imposes them on us. In fact, we have to request it from a teacher, from a monk usually, or a nun, at least 3 times. So we have to show our willingness to take it on. So it's a training. It's not a commandment. Sikha, it's called Sikha Padang Samadhiyami. I will train in this. That's how it can be phrased out in English. So the first one is not to kill or harm beings on purpose. Second is not to take what is not freely given to us. Freely given to us. Even if it's a bag of fruits that you encounter in a gazebo at a picnic area where there's no name on it and there's nobody around for miles. You won't be able to touch it. Well, no one gave it. At least I, as a bhikkhu, cannot touch it. Because I don't know if they offered it to me or not. That might seem as an extreme example, but basically it needs to be given freely by someone to us. The third one is to abstain, the training to abstain from doing or engaging in sexual misconduct, meaning any type of, not just sexual, by the way, sensual also. It doesn't necessarily have to be just sexual. So any situation where somebody's getting hurt, any situation. So it could be a minor, It could be someone against their will. It could be someone else's partner. It could be someone that our partner doesn't know about this thing going on. Essentially, anyone getting hurt at any point, even oneself, physically, if you do it to yourself, and you yourself are getting hurt. Of course, we can write a book on this. The suttas are replete with so many examples on this. The fourth one is related with speech. And many people can attest to this probably being the hardest. The Buddha describes the tongue as the axe in the mouth. Axe in the mouth. It can destroy things. And it can also bring life also. So it has usually 4 divisions to it. Training oneself in not speaking falsehood, not sugarcoating things to make it look or sound in a way that can bring us some benefit, whether it's financial, etc., etc. The second aspect of this, speech related, is harsh speech, cursing or cussing at someone, having anger tonality to it. Words that will cause pain and harm to someone who's on the receiving end of it. The third aspect of this is the gossip or slander or backbiting. Basically, a good litmus test of this would be something like, would I say these words if the person were here? And if the immediate response to that question is no, then guess what? We were about to slander. By the way, if you noticed, we're also practicing right view. And fourthly, in the speech related, speaking idle chatter, frivolous speech, which, if you turn on any news agency, any TV anchor, or radio station in the morning, that's what they're doing. And all that nonsense is coming out of one human's brain, the mind that is all tumultuous and infesting and infecting every other person who's listening to them. Hence the necessity for us to develop a quiet practice during the day. And the fifth precept is not to engage in taking substances, legal or not, that delude the mind. I've had students who say, well, Bhante, it's legal in this country, in this state. I mean, why should it be a problem? And I say, well, you do know that slavery was legal, right? Beating people up, mistreating people, who didn't have your own identity was okay. Was legal, in fact. Yeah, I get it. But basically, we need a mind that is intact. Imagine if I take this cup of water and I spill it intentionally on my keyboard, on this laptop. Well, there goes $2,000-$3,000. Well, our brain is much more sophisticated and much more subtle, and it can easily get screwed up. We need to treat it like a temple, truly like a sacrosanct environment. Because after all, if we're going to experience Nibbana, it is through the use of the brain, which is, I like to think of it as the organ of the mind, that can allow us to understand and process. Because ultimately, it's not enough to be born at a time period where there is the Dhamma. We need to have the capacity, mentally, physically, etc., to be able to understand and process and grasp the jewels, understand what is being said. I know this was a very juicy question. I think it touches on so many other people's, I would hope. Bhante, there's 5 minutes left. Would you like me to address one more question, or?
You can answer shortly.
Okay, yes, shortly.
Okay.
Shortly, yes. The question is from, I think I'm seeing. should one separate oneself silently from those who mean harm, or should one let them know of the intention to separate? Where is this intention to separate oneself from this person that is the source of this negativity? Where is this intention coming from? Is there basically the flavor of hatefulness or anger towards this person from us? Or is it something that we just don't want to be around them? In either case, we need to exercise protection. We need to self-protect. It's very important. Before I give metta, I need to make sure I have enough metta for myself. Before I share karuna or compassion, I need to make sure that I have enough karuna for myself. So similarly, by that extension, I need to make sure that I am safe physically, emotionally, mentally. And if there's a way that I can separate myself with compassion from this surrounding, from this environment, then why not? And if the person shows the willingness to listen, to hear us, and the words that we're going to be speaking out loud to them, if they're coming from a place of metta, and we know that they could benefit, and the timing is right, then go ahead and share it. Tell them. I know I'm answering it briefly. Peggy, should one separate oneself silently from those? Oh, that was the question. Can psychiatric medications help us be more aware, or are they considered intoxicants? Well, if they're given by a psychiatrist, meaning they're prescription drugs, unless the person has, without getting into too much technicalities, unless the person has some psychotic disorders or personality disorders, the person might end up be actually on meds for a long time. So they might actually help to balance, but you need a medical professional to gauge you. Now, what I've noticed is many people use substances, quote unquote, medically, simply to alleviate some of the suffering. So they play doctor on dukkha. Meanwhile, dukkha is there to teach us. We cannot run away from dukkha. We need dukkha because that is the pathway, that is the doorway that will take us to nibbana. However, I see a lot with medical marijuana and other things. I had people a couple of months ago trying to debate with me during a Dhamma talk of the necessity of psychedelic drugs, LSD. Well, unfortunately, that does not mesh with the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. I know there's some secular Buddhists out there who are promoting vehemently, strongly, the incorporation of meditation with psychedelic drugs. I don't know how they've done the math, but it's justified in their heads. And there are huge crowds of people who are following blindly. Well, I will not be part of that because it is not Dhamma, it is adhamma, not the teaching of the Buddha. It is untruth. It's the blind leading the blind. And in the midst of it, they're gathering a lot more negative karmic vipakas or fruits for themselves because they're leading other people on to follow wrong view. Micchaditi versus sammaditi, which is right view. So my encouragement is to stick to right view, because if we get that right, the rest of the seven will nicely fall into place. Like a stream coming down the mountain. It will find its way through the nooks and crannies of rocks and boulders and find its way becoming a river, a wide river, and really change one's life. But don't take my word for it. Practice, practice, practice.
All right, there are one more last question. Benjamin, you can ask your question.
Oh, thank you. I have found that when I try to practice metta, I get attached to the well-being of others, and it makes me more stressed. So when I try to desire or focus on the well-being of others, I get very stressed out as if I'm absorbing their unhealthiness. And I wanted to ask if you have any thoughts on that.
Are you a pleaser?
Yeah.
There you go. And because the very first person, the center, it's like if I'm putting directions on a phone, let's say Google Map or some GPS program, it needs to first know where I'm at in order for it to chart the trajectory. So many of us start, because I did the same thing, by the way, as you're describing, and I would get frustrated because I wanted something to happen there. Meanwhile, I'm ignoring and neglecting this person. It's like somebody who comes to you and asking for money. Let's say they come to you, Benjamin, and say, could you lend me $100, please? And you know that they deserve it. You know that they mean well, and they're probably going to pay you back. But you reach into your pockets and guess what? No $100 bill. How can I create a $100 bill? I can't. So it's similar. Many of us want to intentionalize it. We want to verbalize metta when there's none. And that's a problem. And that creates tension in the brain. It creates tension in the heart. And now we end up hating the practice of metta because it's just a verbal formula. It is lifeless. That's why when I learned the technique, it was like, and I tried it and practiced it, and all of a sudden it made, oh, I'm feeling good. So first and foremost, we need to start from a good place for ourselves. So if I use the image of asking the person to remember a memory that is genuine, that is true, that is full of love for them, undeniable. And usually it takes a few milliseconds and then the person's face lights up. Or even if they struggle with that, I suggest making the aspiration, the nice word or phrase, may I be happy. May I feel relaxed. And breathe in. And even we can start from there and not put extra demands on ourselves. I recommend, if you like, just go onto my YouTube channel, Chandana Bhikkhu, and in the Dhamma talk sections, when I was a layman, I gave the step-by-step guide to metta practice, where I go in detail with this and the pitfalls and the hindrances and how to deal with them when they do show up. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chandana. Thank you for everybody. And next Sunday, coming Sunday, I believe 24. Yes. Next Sunday, Venerable Sanatha Vihari is going to give a Dhamma talk. He's the resident monks at Sarachandra Buddhist Center, San Fernando Valley. Next coming Sunday, Venerable Sanatha Vihari is going to give a Dhamma talk. Thanks for everybody again. Right now we are going to chanting page 4 and page 10 plus some little Pali chanting for blessing for everybody.
තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සංබුද්දස්ස නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සංබුද්දස්ස නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සංබුද්දස්ස බුද්ධං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි ධම්මං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි සංඝං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි ඉතිපිසෝ භගවාන් අරහං සම්මා සංබුද්ධෝ විජ්ජාචරණ සම්පන්නෝ සුගතෝ ලෝකවිද් අනුත්තරෝ පුරිස ධම්ම සාරති සත්තා දේව මනුස්සානං බුද්ධෝ භගවාති ස්වාක්ඛාතෝ භගවතා ධම්මෝ සංදිට්ඨිකෝ අකාලිකෝ ඒහි පස්සිකෝ ඕපනයිකෝ පච්චත්තං වේදිතබ්බ විඤ්ඤූහිති සුපටිපන්නෝ භගවතෝ සාවක සංඝෝ උජුපටිපන්නෝ භගවතෝ සාවක සංඝෝ ඥාය පටිපන්නෝ භගවතෝ සාවක සංඝෝ සාමීචි පටිපන්නෝ භගවතෝ සාවක සංඝෝ යදිදං චත්තාරි පුරිස යුගානි අට්ඨ පුරිස පුග්ගලාං ඒස භගවතෝ සාවක සංඝෝ ආහුනේයෝ පාහුනේයෝ දක්ඛිනේ අංජලි කරණීයෝ අනුත්තරං පුඤ්ඤක්ඛෙත්තං ලෝකස්සාති සබ්බීතියෝ විවජ්ජන්තු සබ්බ රෝගෝ විනස්සතු මාතේ භවත්වන්තරාය සුඛී දීඝායුකෝ භව භවතු සබ්බ මංගලං රක්ඛන්තු සබ්බ දේවතා සබ්බ බුද්ධානුභාවේන සදා සොත්ති භවන්තු තේ භවතු සබ්බ මංගලං රක්ඛන්තු සබ්බ දේවතා සබ්බ ධම්මානුභාවේන සදා සොත්ති භවන්තු තේ භවතු සබ්බ මංගලං රක්ඛන්තු සබ්බ දේවතා සබ්බ සංඝානුභාවේන සදා සොත්ති භවන්තු තේ. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. Neng di dupang dukung pokap unya di nyai dang dusung sangye nyai kong hai pada neng di dupang dukung pokap unya di nyai dang dusung sangye nyai kong hai pada neng di dukung dukung pokap unya di nyai kong dusung sangye nyai kong hai pada Om Mani Padme Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you again for everybody, for all the monks here, Vinita, Chandasara, and Panyalok, and myself. And thank you again for the Chandana Bhikkhu and our computer technician Ashan also here. Hope to see you next week, next Sunday. Again, next Sunday is going to give a Dhamma talk. Venerable Sanata Vihari. By the power of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, you all be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.